Hello, everyone, and welcome to this second episode of Fashion Elements. Today, we are going to be talking about identity. Last time we spoke about economics and politics, and I think today we're going to go more on the creative and more on the personal side of things. We have two incredible speakers who are going to be talking about their identity, but also how to build a brand's identity in companies that are bigger, and how, the designer's identity influence the work that they do. I'm gonna start. We're gonna start with Pete Ferguson, who's gonna be talking about why exactly we chose this topic, and he's gonna tell us sort of what our impressions are about identity. So, just to go to Pete.
So identity is who we are, and whether we consciously acknowledge it or not, we're defined by our identities. And over the past few years, we've seen a great deal of discussion over how we should approach this topic and how to do it in a respectful and considerate way, especially when we get into more personal topics such as race and identity through gender and sexuality. But it's far more than this. It's sexuality, it's gender, it's race, ethnicity, nationality, and they're all different expressions of identity, but even they are not enough categories to fully encapsulate the concept as we know it. And so each of us will likely have a multifaceted identity, and depending on who we want to present ourselves as, we see different variations of this, and there's often a conflict in these presentations. We need only to look to Brexit over the past few years to see how conflicting ideas of identity can result in disagreement. Are we European? Are we passionate about geopolitical collaboration with the EU? Or are we British and desperate for some international sovereignty and political independence on this matter? Many of us here will be both British and European by definition. And it's the emotional weight attached to these ideas of identity which causes this conflict, and we're seeing a polarization in the UK. Generationally, we often see a different approach in how we perceive identity. It's not just Brexit, we see it more than this. We see it in most topics about anything with identity, that older generations and younger generations will approach these ideas very differently. For example, most Leave voters tended to be older, while most Remain voters tended to be younger. And it's not a one-size-fits-all category, but we certainly seem to see the trend going these way. And we see this with acceptance of gender identity on a spectrum rather than as a binary. Identity is approached by so many different viewpoints, and they do tend to align with people's ages. Of course, this isn't always the case, but it's important to clarify that identity is not a new concept. It's not a phase conceived out of liberalism or political correctness or even identity politics. It's something we've always had, and to a certain extent, it's always defined us. We only now as a society are beginning to open ourselves back up to reconsider its full implications. And this is emphasized by discussions about gender and sexuality. Or some might wish to disregard trans and non-binary people as being part of a trend or a form of denialism from reality. We know that historically this isn't true. Trans and non-binary people have always existed and will continue to do so. It's only our acceptance of more diverse gender expressions that's fluctuating. So alongside this widening discussion about how we should accept different identities, we're seeing a new complication arising, and it's an identity crisis. It's a phrase we often use without full understanding of what it means and what its implications are. And within the UK, we can see multiple conflicts in identity resulting in crisis. We already touched upon how Brexit is indicative of a national identity crisis. Are we a nation that doesn't fully know who we are anymore? Are we British or are we more than that? Are we still European? And we see debates surrounding, for example, the Gender Reform Act highlighting our insecurities around masculinity and femininity, about what it means to be someone in a certain gender identity. The discourse bounced on by Black Lives Matter reveals our sensitivity around racial identities and the historic formulation of what it means to be white or what it means to be Black. And so much of how we understand the identity crisis is a result of unfamiliarity with what our various identities represent and how they're constructed. We have to stop defining our values and our identity in opposition to others, because if we only understand ourselves as being British in contrast to being European, then we lose the value of what a European identity can bring. and the solace and the comfort of that history, and it works in reverse as well. And if we only understand masculinity in opposition to femininity, then we cannot truly understand or comprehend the nuance of what gender identity is and what it means to be ourselves. The identity crisis is something which is so negatively conceived that we have to delve into these topics, which is why it was really important for the second event of this series to go straight into the heart of the issue, because we are in a crisis, but how we get out of it is by greater understanding. And that's why it's such a pleasure to have these speakers who will be coming on next to talk about these issues. Thanks.
Right, thank you, Pete. I think that gave a frame of why we chose identity, and also to think about the fact that identity is such a complex issue. We could be here talking about identity for hours and we still wouldn't, be able to mention all of the identities and all of the issues that surround identity. But we're gonna speak to a designer now who has founded a brand that is completely centered against her identity. We spoke to her earlier today because she couldn't be here with us today. But so I'm gonna introduce her, and she's her name's Lily, and she started a brand called Don't Touch My Heritage, DTMH in short. And this brand was created for the Black Diaspora, and she is the brand, but so much thinking goes into it just to make it authentic to her identity. So we're going to talk to Lillian Diaye, who's an activist and founder of DTMH. So you founded DTMH, which is a brand that clearly has more to do than the fashion side. What are you trying to express with it, and why did you feel it needed to exist?
So yeah, DTMH is more a movement than just the fashion, and is here to promote the Black Diaspora. And is made by diaspora and by Black Diaspora, sorry, and the plan is to promote Black Diaspora. I said Black Diaspora a lot.
Yeah, it's fine. I like the question before. So you grew up in the south of France, but you're originally from Senegal. Do you feel French at all?
I don't feel French at all for a very long time, and even more since I left. That was a big reason why I left, because I don't agree with the value of this country. And often we can hear, if you know, happy leave. So this is what I've done. And me, I didn't grow up with my parents. I grew up in a foster care. So we didn't have this culture stuff. Our culture was to be foster kids. So it was completely a different dynamic. While Black, Arabic, that was not an issue. And I start to feel this issue when I start to going to the real world when I was 16, trying to find a job. And then they start to put me back to the reality that I'm a Black woman, and I was really I was fat before, so it was a lot of stuff who bring me back to my position. But I don't grow up with my culture, so it was an odd journey for me. I went to I don't want to be Black to I'm too Black, I don't want to be white. So it was a lot of journey for me to find the right balance. I'm mixed race, so that's go with all the mixed race, but because me, I don't know the two sides, the journey was a bit more complicated to find my real place for me and where I am in the society eyes.
Can you just give us an example of, so you say you didn't feel so Black growing up. So can you give us an example of one time where, you maybe didn't feel so Black, but you really got put into it by white people?
I used to doing dance, and in France we got something called Energy Music Awards. It's like the BTS you have here. It's for like people doing music. And I remember doing the audition, everything going well. I get it and everything, and then they take me on the side, and the production told me I was 17, 18, and they told me that the network will never take me on TV because I was too dark, too fat, and it was not going with the rest of the group. And I think it's the first time I was like, oh, I can't do everything like other people because of the way I look. And it was the first time I understand with an adult brain, I was able to understand the whole situation. That was the first time, I think.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how your brand works and where you source your fabrics and how they are produced?
So everything is produced in Senegal because it was really important for me to don't going there and kind of gentrify my own country and come with my ID and just make what I want. The plan is, like I said before, is really to promote diaspora, and where we come from Africa or India for some people, wherever the minority you came from. So really, it's really important for me that I'm not being like the designer and being the star. This is not my goal with DTMH. I really want that to be made in Senegal. And I really want to use the fabrics out there, they're directly there, because in Senegal, they're making their own fabrics as well. There is a whole art that people making the fabrics and everything. So I really want it to be from there. Everything is made there and I can sell it here. But I didn't want to make in England because it's cheaper or some stuff like this. I really wanted to make in the terrace next to my grandma's house. It's really important for me.
Great. Now, just because you keep talking about the Black diaspora, can we just sort of specify what that is for people that might not know what it is?
All right. Black diaspora is really easy. It's basically when your parents are not born in the country where you're born. So for example, my father from Senegal, but I'm born in France. So let's take my example out of that. But it's just saying like you grow up with the British culture, with the British school, but at home, you had like the Nigerian or Ghanaian culture, food, language, and the Black diaspora is like my generation or younger than me, or just try to basically deal with the duality of all the origin that they have. The parents told him that they have to, what is the right word? Sorry. Integrate properly, because this is what, when you're from diaspora, your parents will always to tell you to be quiet and good to integrate. At the same time, there is this like you belong where you are and you born there. So there is a real duality for the Black diaspora. Like they legitimate to be what they are, but they don't feel legitimate. They are between the both.
Yeah. Now, I think we need to talk about cultural appropriation a little bit, because I think a lot of people know it exists, but I don't think a lot of people know why certain things are offensive. So say a white woman went out tomorrow and got braids. Why is that offensive in very simple terms?
It just is offensive because, first of all, it's my culture. First, just this. It's just like, wow, there is a whole story behind hair and Black people. So obviously we have to go back. But during the slavery, like the whole story behind hair, even before, Black hair was like, the way they was made or the way they was braid was like your caste, where you are in class, what village you come from. So there is a big story. Then slavery have a big story as well in our hair. And even if I see, for example, a white boy with a drag, I will be like, do you know that basically that was because white people didn't like hair of slave and they asked them to cover it. And from that, the drag born slowly. So there is so much story. And I think the big problem of cultural appropriation is people misunderstand appreciation and cultural appropriation. For example, I love Indian culture. I'm in love with it. But I will never wear a sari or put something here, I forget the name, to go in a festival because I'm half white and half of me oppressed. They on keep to oppress because the society where we live in keep to oppress. So some people, they just like, but this is not me. I don't feel that I'm doing wrong. But because if you're white, you keep to represent by your privilege, the white supremacy where we're living, the system where we're living, you can't keep to doing that because we're still oppressed by it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know what I mean. Like, this is not appreciation if you keep to like doing something with oppressed by your own race. That's it. I don't say that all white people are racist, but the system make them racist. Mm-hmm. So you need to do a deconstruction. And when you know, is more easy. When if you know about cultural appropriation, you will not do cultural appropriation. You can't go together because you understand that it's not something that you should do.
And what do you say to people who say that by limiting what people can wear and do, you are actually making people more divided rather than promote integration?
Well, I will reply them that first of all, there is enough of Black people who wear what they want to wear, so we don't need them to wear what we're wearing. And second of all, we don't put in the separation, the system it is. So like I always say to people, always try to see from no personal point of view. It's not me personally what I do if you're a man, if you're white. No, it's like me in this society, what are my privilege? And from this privilege, what can I do and what I can't do? That's it. Like there is some stuff from our own privilege you can't do. For example, one of my privileges is to be light skinned. When I'm in the room with dark skinned women, I sit down and I listen because it's not my place to talk right now. So I think it's all about shaking privilege for everyone.
So how can fashion be used to create a conversation on topics such as racism?
I think for me, fashion is the way of people express themselves. I really don't like this whole very serious world of fashion. This is why I don't try to go because it's very not funny. But I think like for me, fashion, the definition of fashion is the definition of who you are, or you want to be seen and perceived by society, or you want to represent yourself is by your fashion. The way you feel today, I mean, for me, the way I feel, I'm gonna show that by the way I dressed. If I don't want to be seen, if I want to be seen, so fashion is a way to express ourselves, and to talk about racism or about any issue is about expression. So I think fashion is the right way as well to talk about that, because it's a way to express, and this is we need to express about this kind of subject.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to talk about identity a little bit more because, for example, you know, you can have Black power, but obviously you can't have white power. And most of it is also because, you know, when you look at a white person, you think, you know, where they're from. You know, they might be French, they might be English. So how does, you know, how can you just talk a little bit more about Black identity as a whole? Is there more than a Black identity? Is there more identities? And sort of how important is it, for example, that now, you know, there's all the ancestry thing where, you know, they tell you where you are from, for people who are descendants of slave and so who actually don't know exactly where they are from?
Yeah, I think there is like this question. There is two sides. First, I think there is this blackness, like there is this feeling of we are part of something. Sometimes Black is enough. Being Black is enough. When we talk about representation, I remember having some conversation with American people complaining for a movie like 12 Years of Slavery or Get Out because the Black actor was British. And then I'm just like, I think Black is enough for that. But I can understand as well, like being Black is so complex because there is being a dark skinned person, being a man, being a woman, that you can't put everything on being together. And I think some Black people struggle with that because they feel that we put all of them in the same bag and you can't really express. Some people just, I'm not just Black. And some Black people, they spend their life to try to prove that my Blackness don't gonna define me. Unfortunately, I think that it's good to understand that your Blackness kind of define you and embrace it. And what can I do next to that? And I forget the other side of your question, sorry.
No, just about the fact that so some people that descend from slavery, they obviously don't know exactly where they're from.
That's good.
I've seen lots of like TikToks of people finding out, and it's very emotional. So, what does it feel like to you? Obviously, you know where you're from, but in your opinion, to not know where you're from for like half of your life?
It seemed crazy for me. So the first time I thought about that, I was just came in London. So it was 4 years ago. And I'm an American guy, and I said, "Where are you from?" And he was like, "Boston." I was like, "Yeah, but where are you from?" He was like, "Boston." I was like, "Yeah, but why are you Black?" He was like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Oh my God." And because I'm from France, and because we're from like this country, like England, is colonization of bringing us here and not slavery, we know where we come from. So it's completely different. It seemed for me to make a lot of sense why Black American people are so lost. If you don't know your roots for real, Black can't be enough. You know what the comparison was earlier. If you don't know where you're from and you just know that you're Black, but you don't know from where, I think that's why in America, Black American and me, the way I explore diaspora, for example, I know that DTMH, American people, they can't understand yet. They can understand the fashion, they can understand how pretty it is, but they couldn't understand what I try to say because I have a link with Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I have a link with my own country, which is Senegal. They have a link only with being Black and they feel American. So I think that gives you a lot of, it makes you lost. And if you lost, it's not good. So that's why African American, they like, is a bit more tricky. And I can't even really talk about this subject because I don't know why is it to only being Black without knowing from where.
Mm-hmm. So just the last question. So in a future where sort of we kind of go more towards acceptance and a less racist future, how do you think you know, white people and Black people are going to relate to each other?
I don't know yet if we can arrive in this stage because it's really tricky. I think that I see white people as an ally, but I don't see being on this whole togetherness. This is not what I put together because for me, this vision of togetherness is a bit the same vision that I don't see colors. There is way too much trauma. What we're doing now is what been done. It's like when some people say, oh, but we should have never invented the plastic. Yeah, but now what we're doing is done. So I think that if we're going for this, we need to see more white people as an ally, and I think white people, they need to feel less as a savior. Example, George Floyd manifestation. I went there one, and I was shocked by seeing white people screaming more harder than me. I was like, how can you appropriate even my pain? I want to see you as ally. I want to see you behind and say sorry. And okay, I get it. What can I do to help? But not feeling that you need my help to get there. This is, if we keep to do like this, it's not gonna work. The savior complex is not good. And I feel like for the white people having our cause, most of the time, they end up to feel like, I'm gonna save you guys, don't worry. And this is not the right balance. So I think the first thing everyone should do, and what we will do for Black people and white people go together, but that is for all the societal problem, I think, is deconstruct, understand our privilege, deconstruction, and question. And what can I do? And listen the Black people, what you can do for these Black people. So for example, white women, when I come to feminism, is really complicated because every time they feel like I take something from them, I take away the like pain. And I'm just like, this is not what I try to say. I just try to say that there is different pain because I'm Black. So I don't know. I don't have a reply to know how we're gonna be all together, but I know that I want to see more white people as an ally and less as a savior.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was very interesting. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. And sorry for my French accent, people.
All right. Right. Thank you so much, Lily. And it is a shame that she couldn't be here. I see we have some questions in the question box, but obviously because she isn't here, she can't answer them, but I will forward them to her. And you can follow her social media, and I'm sure she will be more than happy to reply. But now that we've talked about a person's identity, I think we also need to talk about a brand's identity, because it's easy to think about, what a brand's identity is when there are a few people that run this brand. But when we talk about big fashion brands that have so many levels to them, it's much harder to understand and see how that identity can be represented. So our next speaker is John Hooks, who is an independent consultant, but he has worked in so many fashion brands before. He was the deputy chairman of Giorgio Armani, worked at Ralph Lauren, and now he's a senior advisor for McKinsey. And so, John, we often say that a fashion brand needs to be unique and have a strong identity, but how do you identify the identity of a brand that has thousands of people working for it, and how do you create it?
Well, I mean, first of all, in the most simplest terms, a brand has to be recognizable. It has to stand out to be a commercial success. So obviously, it has to create a recognizable identity, and the inherent qualities of the product are probably not sufficient. Very rarely can a product stand up by itself, particularly in the fashion world. So the creation of a strong identity is essential. Often it's propped up by a logo that in itself it has to be recognizable. And in fact, in recent years, we've seen the logo migrate from the label to become an intrinsic part of the design. So obviously, every brand has to try and develop its own type of identity. I always think that a good test with fashion brands, maybe if you close your eyes and try, and if you hear the name of a brand, trying to sort of picture in your mind's eye what that brand represents. And some brands are very highly characterized. I mean, I think everybody knows what Versace looks like, or Hermes, or maybe even Armani to some extent. Other brands are not so easily imagined. And every brand has to find its own sort of level there. Also because a strong identity can also be a disadvantage. So, you can also become a prisoner of your brand and become too strongly identified with elements that are no longer relevant or attractive. So you have to keep it fairly fluid. So it's a delicate game. And you know, fashion by its very definition is about change and evolution. It's constantly changing. So how do you maintain a certain fluidity to be able to evolve with society, with the consumer's expectations? But how can you also have certain key factors that are static, that are recognizable in time, and appeal maybe to different generations, for example?
Thank you. So when we talk about a brand's identity, does that coincide with the identity of the owner or the manager of the brand, or because these brands, you know, are bought and, you know, end up, you know, having different managers and everything, can it not be the same identity of the manager and the founder or the owner?
Well, it would, you know, it has to be because obviously people don't last that long. Most people would hope that a brand would outlast an individual. So you have to be able to evolve from that. And you know, there are obviously key examples. If you think of Balenciaga or Givenchy, the manifestation of those brands today has very little to do with the original designers who founded the brand. It's completely a different proposition now. There are brands, obviously, where the owner is still alive. Again, Armani would be a big example. He's in his mid-80s. He's very much in control. He owns the company 100%. And the sort of Armani look it has been consistent and is continuing. Probably less relevant, obviously, in the passage of years. So you can't really be tied to an individual person. And I think an interesting thing in recent years as well is that many, particularly the sort of more renowned luxury brands with a long heritage, played very much on that heritage. But that's much less so now. Gucci is a good example. That's more or less reinvented itself in recent years. But also, obviously, Louis Vuitton. You know, a lot of luxury brands was based in sort of nostalgia, in European aristocratic, you know, social codes. Because obviously, fashion and identity is obviously linked to status as well. People buy fashion brands not just for their own self-gratification, but also to assert their status, to show status. And the sort of codes of status have changed. Obviously, they change always with the change in generation. All the tweedy, horsey, country gentleman, a country aristocrat type of existence is no longer as attractive as it was even 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The Gucci and Hermes both come from a sort of horsey background, but they've had to really reinvent themselves. And of course, the other big feature is that not just the generational change, but also nowadays, in the past 20, 30 years, the pool of consumers around the world is no longer just limited to North America and Europe. Asia has become very big, and you know, young Chinese neither know nor care about all these European social codes. So there's much less emphasis on the past, much less emphasis on heritage. Still necessary because it gives you a certain authenticity. It shows that you're not just a startup. You haven't just arrived. You've got deep, deep roots. But you don't talk so much about them now as you did in the past. You concentrate on the future, and we see brands identifying with, you know, rap artists and celebrities, sports celebrities, singers, whatever, because it has to appeal to a new universal culture, and therefore it's projected in the future. Because I mean, it's interesting what Lily said before as well. We all have our histories, we all have our origins. History tends to divide people because it's so specific and so different. The future unites people partly because it's not specific by its very nature, because we don't even know what it's going to be. It's very vague, it's very hopeful and positive and very aspirational. So our aspirations unite us and become this sort of new culture that fashion is very sensitive to and plugs into, to try and exploit it and appeal to as wide a public as possible.
On your point about celebrities, actually, we have a question from the public. Actually, that's quite interesting, because they say, is attaching a face of a celebrity to a product a standard procedure to promote the brand? Because this creates an everlasting reputation. So, for example, Jane Birkin and Hermes. What's your sort of thought on that?
Yeah, it's a quick way to gain a recognition, and also to sort of crystallize your values, because values can be very vague things. They can be difficult to describe. One plays a lot in the ambiguity that's around values. We see that the consumer nowadays is looking more and more for a brand to stand for certain values. It's not just about design. It's not just about price quality ratio. It's, because going back to where we started, is that it's all about identity, and people define themselves. People want to create their own identities. And I think we have to talk about as well, people also want to reject certain identities. People do not want to be stereotyped. They want to say, yes, I'm this, but I'm also this. And fashion is, because it changes constantly, is a very good vehicle for defining your own style, your own identity. And celebrities can be a shortcut to that, because if one likes a celebrity, one knows more or less what they stand for. It's an emotional appeal. So brands can piggyback a little bit on these celebrities, with all the dangers that comes with that as well, because we've seen also in various parts of the world, particularly in China, people who've been saying the wrong things or have offended Chinese sensibilities, that brands have had to make a very quick exit from some sort of sponsorship or association and drop celebrities. So like everything, it's a double-edged sword, and you can't relax on this. And I think as time goes by, brands will be looking for even other ways of reinforcing their image and their set of values.
Mm. So with the pandemic, we've seen lots of things change in any field, really. What aspects of this change we've seen in the pandemic will remain, especially thinking about the identity of a brand and how involved they are with sort of social issues and all those things?
Well, I mean, the common sort of wisdom is that the pandemic has sort of accelerated pre-existing trends, things that were already, people were getting, worked up about beforehand. The pandemic has made a fast forward on these, and they become much more relevant than they were before. I mean, obviously, environmental issues, which are already very, very big, but even more so now, because we see that the pandemic in one way or another is related also to environmental issues. I think it has accelerated things. Obviously, digital, people are shopping online and not in stores, but the stores were failing even before that. There's also been some sort of reversal as well, in a way. Up to 2019, the amount of travel was increasing exponentially, and now suddenly everything is stopped. Duty free, which was a very, very big part of the fashion industry, has more or less been wiped out for the foreseeable future. So suddenly brands find themselves in a position where they can't sell, a lot of the products that they were selling in Paris and in London and in Milan were to Chinese tourists, people coming from China. So China as a market was not just how much one sold in China, it was about how much Chinese nationals bought all over the world. And now suddenly there's no travel, so all these stores are trying to survive selling to locals. And you can imagine, London luxury stores in Bond Street just trying to sell to British people is going to be probably pretty tough to match the numbers that they had before. So I think brands now have to see they have to become more local. They have to become obviously and also in some ways more culturally sensitive, because if you're selling in the Middle East, if you're selling in Japan and China, South America, Europe, to a local client, there it's very different, because when you have a very fast traffic of tourists who come and then you maybe never see them again, the service within the store has to change, but you have locals, you have to build up much closer relationships. I think the effect of all of that, it's too early to say obviously, but the effect of all that could well be a certain sort of fragmentation in the identity and the message of brands. We're going to have versions of the same brand in various sort of places around the world. And I think also that's happening anyway for other reasons as well. I think in China, you're seeing much more nationalism. There's much more pride about local Chinese production, about local Chinese designers. And so that's affecting a lot. Brands are responding very much to Chinese tastes, etc., which may not correspond to those in the West. So trying to please everybody probably will, I think, lead to a multi-message, a fragmentation, which is going to be a big challenge to maintaining a recognizable identity that we talked about before.
Right. So you, apart from working in fashion, you're also in the board of Manchester United, and sports have and sports brands such as Nike have been quite good, or they have tried to be inclusive, for example, with having providing like sports hijabs for Muslim women in sports. What do the two words have in common, sports and fashion, and what should they take from each other?
Well, I have to tell you, I became a board member, I think, almost 8-9 years ago. So, and I didn't think there was much in common. I was quite surprised, actually, to even go on the board. The more I've been involved in this, the more I see a lot of common ground. And again, it's a lot of it is linked to the discussions you had previously about identity. I mean, we all want to be able to make our identity, and we think we have a lot of choice in life. We probably don't have that much choice in life. We have the illusion of choice sometimes, which consumerism creates, etc. But belonging to a football club and deciding what to wear are some of or declarations of who I am and of my identity. So I think strong identity and passion for identity is common to both these worlds. And the other one is that obviously that both sport and fashion are actually just divisions of parts of a much bigger industry, which is called the entertainment industry. It's what people do in their free time. It's how they want to spend their time. It's what people do when they don't have to work or do other things that they don't want to do. And so it's an important part of people's lives, I think. It's an important part of young people's lives as well. So it's got all the energy and dynamism of young people. In more sort of concrete terms, I was struck after having spent all my career in sort of fashion houses with designers who are, strong personalities, who are in a way the lifeblood of the company, because they often own the company, they design the product, they make it, so everything goes through them. I was quite interested to see the tension that exists in fashion between creativity and the commercialization of that fashion. Also exists in the football world. So you have basically the pure activity of the business, playing good football, winning football matches, making beautiful clothes and accessories, etc., depending very strongly on commercial success, because obviously you need the money to finance that, to keep the ball rolling. But at the same time, the commercial success can also undermine those things. So, if the sponsorships become too important in football and the footballers are spending too much time promoting things, products, etc., on social media or whatever, it can take away from the football, it can take away from their concentration, it can take away from the manager. And the same thing in fashion. If a product is over distributed, if they make bad commercial decisions, it can very much undermine all the creativity. So and there's no obviously solution. It's just a constant tension between creativity and exploiting that creativity, which I find interesting.
It certainly is, because I think a lot of things are way more connected than we assume they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the older you get, the more you realize that as well. It's all interconnected.
We have some questions actually from attendees. So is there a brand in particular that you think has successfully built and sustained identity within the fashion industry? And of the up and coming brands, which one do you think is the most likely to really be able to build a strong identity and carry that on in the future?
So is there a brand? So what is it? Is the brand?
So is there a brand in particular that has successfully built and sustained identity? And of the up and coming ones, which one do you think will be able to do that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the brand that everybody talks about, but it's not really a fashion brand, because there's the world of fashion and there's the world of luxury. Now, they were quite separate. And some people in the industry regard them as quite separately. They're actually merging a lot, because luxury is becoming much more like fashion, and therefore much more changeable. If one takes a brand like Hermes, everybody has been in awe and admired the incredible economic success, the stability of the brand, also the fact that the brand never compromises quality, etc., etc. So, that would be a brand that would be a sort of benchmark for staying at the top of its game for such a long, long time. But then you can see other brands like Louis Vuitton, which, Virgil Abloh, they feel the need to change because they see the writing on the wall, which we talked about earlier, that all these codes of status are no longer as powerful with the consumer as they were before, because a whole generation of consumers dying out, and therefore there's the need for change. So nothing really lasts forever. And very interesting to see in the next few years is how these luxury brands become more fashionable without sort of losing out on the stability and the high profit margins, to say the least, of being a luxury brand. So Hermes, I think, would be a great example of that. But there's nobody in a sort of completely safe position at the moment. As regards new brands, I think I'm the last one to make predictions about fashion, because I think you have to be close as a consumer to fashion, which I am very evidently not anymore. So I can only really talk about it as the business of fashion rather than the passion of fashion. But I think values are extremely important. I think more and more consumers will be identifying with brands in the same way that you go with political parties almost. Does this brand represent my values and what I think of? Would I be ashamed to be associated with this brand, etc., etc.? So all these things that we've been talking about, again, obviously the environmental, but also discrimination in all its forms. I think brands that can closely associate with that will be successful, but they have to be sincere about it, because obviously the biggest threat of all, to be brief, is what we call greenwashing with regards to the environment. I mean, a lot of people still just see these things as marketing tools to push themselves forward, but they have to, I think, the sincerity, authenticity, people really believe in what they do, will become, is more and more apparent, because transparency, everything's open to daylight now, much more than it ever was before. And I think that's what's going to come through. To be successful, you can't just run after success. You have to believe in what you're doing. Then the success is almost a byproduct of doing well what you believe you're doing.
And now the last question, again, from the attendees. You were talking earlier about brands differentiating in their selling strategies in different countries because there are different needs. But for an up-and-coming brand, does focusing on local diminish their chance of becoming worldwide recognizable?
I don't think so, because I think the whole thing of it obviously is a very complex issue. So one can say one thing and then contradict oneself 5 minutes later or 2 seconds later. I think local is very important, and whatever the technology, whatever the future, we all have to live in time and in place. We can go everywhere in the world, etc. But I think again, coming back to identity, we have an international, we have a universal identity, and we have a local identity, and that local identity will always remain, because it makes us what we are, and it's where we feel most comfortable, where our friends are, where we grew up, whatever it is. Because now we almost can choose what we want, our locality in some ways. So I think doing well, it's what drives you in that. Which are, I say, the authenticity and the sincerity and the relevance. I think things can be relevant locally, but also be relevant universally. They're manifested in a certain way in a locality, but people from all over the world can understand them as well. So I don't think there's going to be a contradiction between being universal and being local. If that answers the question, probably doesn't. Forgive me.
No, I think it does. I think, again, it's difficult to put it into words because it's such an abstract and complex.
And also it's in motion at the moment. We're in the middle of it, so it's very difficult to see where things are heading. And fashion by definition is unpredictable. If it was predictable, it wouldn't be fashion. I don't know what's going to happen in fashion tomorrow. I do know that it will be something totally that we don't expect. I remember the 80s and the 90s, and if every 10 years you said to somebody, next 10 years the top 2 or 3 brands will be this and this and this, most people would not have believed who emerged. Nobody believed that, I don't know, in the 80s that Prada and Gucci would be fashionable in the end of the 90s. Gucci was washed out. It was an old-fashioned, fuddy-duddy brand. Prada, even though it had been around a long time, nobody had really heard of it so much. So, it's going to be, that's the great thing about fashion.
Right, and I think I always ask this, do you have any sort of comments and opinions on how you see young people's in terms of identity, in terms of what the speaker before you said? How do you see us sort of behaving, and how do you see us having an impact, and sort of what that impact might be? It's a hard question. It's a very open question.
Hard question, but I don't want to become an old. Yeah, I think that everybody should have their own role. I tell you what, I think that young people should do everything they possibly can to destroy 80% of what they find in the world. And I think old people should do everything they can to defend the 10, 15, 20% of stuff that's worth defending. And we all have our roles to do. Of course, the big problem is identifying what that 10, 20% is, or what that 80% is. What do you throw out, what do you keep? I think generally, young people, they've got it right. I would, all the things that we grew up with and we accepted, we hopefully didn't approve, but we thought it wasn't going to change. I mean, that's why we need, but life's been like that, that's what generations are about. They're meant to change and question and renew and destroy and everything. I can have my own personal, feelings about what should survive and what shouldn't survive, but it's not up to me. And I just say good luck to young people, basically. But don't screw it up, though.
All right, I think that's a good answer, to be honest. And so thank you very much, John Hooks, and thank you very much, Lillian Dyer, for being with us today, and thank you for the attendees for asking the questions. And I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you at the next one.
All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.